She's been collecting a debt I never agreed to for 15 years. When she finally presented the bill, it was my apartment. Part 1. The meeting I didn't see coming. I'm 27 now. I own a small apartment in a mid-sized city, a used Civic that runs fine, and a savings account I'm quietly proud of. Nothing dramatic. Nothing flashy. Just the quiet architecture of a life I built carefully, over years, one decision at a time. 3 months ago, my aunt, 58, widowed, always a large presence at family gatherings, asked to meet me for lunch. Something important, she texted. Just us. I assumed it was health news. She'd had some circulatory issues the year before, and she lived alone. I went into the restaurant already preparing myself to offer help, to be a good nephew, to show up the way you're supposed to show up for family. She ordered coffee and a salad and let me eat half my sandwich before she laid it out on the table between us like a legal brief she'd spent months preparing. I've been thinking a lot about what I contributed to your life, she began. And I don't think you fully understand what I gave you. I put my sandwich down. She told me she'd been reflecting, that was the word she used, reflecting, on my parents' near divorce when I was 12. On the intervention she organized that weekend. On what she believed she'd prevented. Then she told me that my apartment, my career, my stability, all of it, traced directly back to what she did that weekend. And that she wanted recognition. Formal recognition. The apartment, she said, or $70,000. That's my reward for what I did. I remember the quality of the silence that followed. The restaurant noise continued, dishes, laughter, a child asking for ketchup, but between us there was a kind of stillness I'd never experienced with another human being. You're serious, I finally said. Completely, she said. And she was. Her eyes were steady. She'd rehearsed this. She believed every word. Part 2. The story I grew up with, and what was underneath it. Let me give you the family mythology first, because it's important to understand it before I explain how I examined it. I was 12. My parents were struggling. I knew this the way children know things, which is incompletely and with great ambient dread. Whispered arguments. Silences at dinner that felt different from normal silence. My mother crying quietly in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. My father sleeping on the couch for a while, which nobody explained and nobody had to. Then my aunt arrived for a long weekend. There were closed-door conversations. Voices rose and fell. At the end of the weekend, something had shifted. My parents seemed, not fixed, exactly, but oriented toward each other again. The coldness broke. They started counseling a few weeks later. They stayed married. They're still married now, 15 years on, genuinely, not performatively, happy. The story my aunt has always told, she saved them. She organized an intervention. She made them face what they were destroying. She brought them back from the edge. I heard this story at every family gathering for years. She told it at cousins' weddings. She told it at holiday dinners. She told it to new people who joined the family, to friends of friends, to anyone within range when marriage or family came up. I saved that whole family, she would say, with a particular gravity, a satisfaction that seemed to sustain her. And we, always acknowledged it. Thanked her. Nodded. She had been there during a hard time. She had helped. That was real. What I didn't understand, until she sent me an invoice, was that she'd been tallying this entire time. After the lunch, I did something she probably didn't expect. I went to the source. I called my parents and told them exactly what had happened, what she'd asked for, and what she'd said. Then I asked them what actually happened that weekend. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "Your aunt organized a family conversation. Made us sit down and talk. That was helpful. But your dad and I had already been talking about going to counseling. We loved each other. The divorce talk it was desperation, not decision. We were saying terrible things to see if we could still feel something. Your aunt facilitated one conversation. She didn't create what was already between us. She helped us find it." My father's version was even more specific. She was very intense that weekend. Very dramatic about saving the marriage. We appreciated her caring. We genuinely did. But honestly, we'd spoken with a counselor's office the week before she even arrived. She was there when we had a breakthrough. She wasn't the cause of the breakthrough. There's a difference. And then I asked about the packed bags. Because my aunt, at lunch, had described them vividly. I saw your mother's bags. Packed by the door. Your father sleeping in his car. They were done. It was the most cinematic detail in her story, and the most specific. My mother paused. I never packed bags. I thought about leaving, yes. But I never actually packed anything. I don't know where that came from. Your aunt, she has a dramatic memory. She remembers things more intensely than they happened. Part 3. Examining the mythology. I want to be careful here, because my aunt isn't a villain. Understanding this took me some time. She's not a calculating person who invented a story to steal from her nephew. She's a person with a deep, genuine, almost structural need to be essential to the people she loves, and who has, over years and decades, built a private archive of moments where she believes she made the decisive difference. The marriage weekend was her most important entry. I started looking at the pattern. I talked to relatives, gently, over the weeks following that lunch. My grandmother, she's always needed to be important. She tells everyone she saved your parents' marriage. Your parents are too polite to correct her publicly, but privately, they'll tell you the truth. She was one voice in a complicated time. A cousin, she told me she prevented my divorce too. I wasn't anywhere near divorce. I had one argument with my husband at a family party and she pulled me aside for an hour. She still brings it up. Calls it her intervention. Another relative told me about a friend whose business my aunt had saved. The friend remembered receiving one piece of advice at a dinner party. A neighbor she'd rescued from depression, he said she'd called a few times during a rough month. He was grateful, but rescue wasn't the word he'd have chosen. My aunt had built an interior world in which she was essential to everyone she'd ever helped. And she'd been building it for decades, quietly, brick by brick. Not out of malice. Out of something lonelier than malice. She needed to matter. She needed her presence in difficult moments to have been the thing that turned the tide, because if she was just present, just caring, just there, that wasn't enough. She needed to have saved people. The mythology of the packed bags, the father in the car, the marriage on its last night, that was a story she'd told herself so many times that the telling had become memory. I don't think she knows she invented the bags. I think she believes them now. That's the sad part. That's the part one had to sit with. Part 4. The logic I refused. But understanding her need didn't obligate me to satisfy it at the cost of $70,000 or my apartment. And I want to lay out clearly why, because she made a sophisticated argument that deserves a sophisticated answer. Her causal chain went like this. Without her intervention, my parents' divorce, I grow up in a broken home, I'm psychologically damaged, my career suffers, I never save enough for the apartment. Therefore, she's the first link in the chain. The apartment is built on her foundation. She deserves a piece of it. The problem is that every single step is uncertain. First, she didn't single-handedly save my parents' marriage. They were already working on it before she arrived. She facilitated one conversation. That's real and I don't want to erase it, but facilitated one conversation in a process already underway is not the same as sole architect of the outcome. The parents themselves said so. Second, even if they had divorced, my trajectory wasn't determined. She cited statistics about children of divorce having worse outcomes, lower earnings, more mental health struggles. Those statistics describe population averages. They don't describe individuals. Many children of divorce build stable, productive, well-resourced lives. Many children of intact marriages struggle badly. You cannot look at a specific 12-year-old in 2010 and say with certainty what kind of adult he'll become based on whether his parents stay together. She was pricing her intervention against a worst-case scenario for my hypothetical alternate self, a self who might have been just fine. Third, my apartment came from my choices. I want to be concrete about this because it matters. I started saving at 21. I lived with 2 roommates for 4 years, a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood I'd never have chosen if I had more options. I drove a car I bought for $4,200 that required a prayer every winter morning. I didn't take vacations the way my friends did. I built spreadsheets and sat with them on Sunday evenings and moved money from checking to savings with the discipline of someone who understood that this was the only way it was going to happen. I worked overtime when it was offered. I took on freelance projects at night. I passed on things I wanted in favor of things I needed. Not once, in any of those 6 years, was my aunt present. She wasn't sitting with me in the cold apartment. She didn't help me resist the vacation my coworkers kept inviting me on. She didn't read the mortgage documents with me or research the neighborhood or negotiate with the seller. She was nowhere in the work of building what I built. She wants credit for the foundation. But she didn't build the foundation. She was present for one weekend in my parents' marriage, a weekend that, according to my parents, was one part of a larger process they were managing themselves. And from that one weekend, she has constructed a claim on everything I've made since. When I raised this with her, she doubled down on the chain. Without stable family, without your stable psychology, without your career success, without the apartment. I asked her, by that logic, who raised my mother? My grandmother. Who taught my grandmother to be the kind of woman who could sustain a marriage under pressure? Her parents. Every step back in the causal chain is someone with a prior claim. Why does she get the apartment instead of my grandmother? She couldn't answer that. The logic only applied to her. Part 5. The confrontation and what followed. I met with her again. I told her what my parents had said. I told her about the bags my mother never packed. I told her about the counselor's appointment my parents had made before she arrived. I told her, as gently as I could, that her version of events didn't match theirs. She was furious. Not calculating furious. Genuinely, painfully furious, the way a person is when they feel a core story about themselves being challenged. They're embarrassed, she said. They don't want to admit how bad it was. I was there. I saw what I saw. Mom says she never packed bags. She's protecting herself. She had packed bags. I remember. I looked at her face while she said this. She meant it. Somewhere in the architecture of her memory, the bags were real. She had built them from the intensity of the weekend, from the stakes she'd felt, from the story she'd needed to tell, and now they were as real to her as anything else that had happened in that house. I said, as carefully as I could, I believe you genuinely think you saved them. I believe that weekend mattered to you, that you cared deeply, that your presence meant something. I'm not trying to erase that. But their account of what happened doesn't support what you're asking for. And my apartment was built by 6 years of my work, not by one weekend when I was 12. I can't pay you for a contribution you've exaggerated and a causal chain I can't verify. She told me I was ungrateful. That I didn't understand where my good life came from. That if I didn't acknowledge her properly, she would tell the whole family what kind of nephew she'd raised from disaster. I told her to tell whoever she wanted. Update 1. The family fallout. She did tell people. Her version, which featured me as cold, calculating, and cruel, a boy who had been given everything by her sacrifice and now spat in her face. Some relatives heard it and believed her. She has always been dramatic and devoted and certain, and certainty is persuasive. She was always so dedicated to that family, one aunt by marriage told my mother. I can't believe he'd refuse her. But others knew the pattern. The cousin who'd been saved from divorce texted me, she's doing it again. Bigger scale, bigger ask. Stay steady. My grandmother, who is 81 and too old for mythology, said quietly, she's always needed to be the hero. This is just the largest version of that need. You don't owe her anything. My parents, bless them, made a gentle, deliberate statement to the family. Not an attack on my aunt. They said, she helped us during a difficult time, we are grateful for that, but we don't believe she saved our marriage, and we don't think our nephew owes her what she's asking. We saved our marriage, together, over 15 years. It was more than many parents would have done. The family divided, as families do. Some sided with her. Some sided with me. Most people retreated to the discomfort of not knowing what to think, which is the most honest response to complicated family situations. Update 2. What I learned about her. In the months after the confrontation, I found myself thinking about my aunt differently than I ever had. Not with anger, I'd moved through that quickly, but with something closer to grief. She is a woman who spent her whole life being present for people in hard moments. She showed up. She made calls and organized conversations and inserted herself into crises with the firm belief that her presence was decisive. Sometimes it was. Sometimes she was one voice in a chorus. Sometimes she was simply there, which is not nothing, but which is also not everything. And for some reason, the death of her husband, maybe, or the quiet of her house, or the way the years had moved past her, her collection of saved moments had become the primary architecture of her identity. She needed to have mattered. Deeply, decisively mattered. Not just shown up. Not just helped. Saved. When I refused to give her the apartment, when I told her her intervention wasn't what she believed it was, I wasn't just declining a financial demand. I was refusing to validate the story that held her together. I was telling her that her most important chapter was, at least partly, mythology. And I couldn't protect her from that. I couldn't pay $70,000 for a fiction I didn't believe just to keep her internal world intact. Some needs can't be purchased. Some validations can't be forced. I think about that a lot. Update 3. 6 months later. She stopped attending events I was at. Then she stopped being invited to events I was at, which is a different thing. Families find equilibria, and the equilibrium here was that we would exist in separate orbits. I heard, through my mother, that she was still telling her story. The ending had been updated. Now she had a villain, a nephew who had denied her reward, who had shown his true character when tested. I had become a new chapter in her mythology, proof of something about the ingratitude of the young, the short memory of those who've been saved. I couldn't control that. I stopped trying. What I could control was my own account of events, which I kept close, and shared only when asked, and tried to tell without cruelty toward her. Because she isn't cruel. She's wounded, and she wounds people from that wound, and the distinction matters even when the effect is the same. My parents visited me at the apartment around month 5. My mother walked through the rooms and said, "You worked hard for this," in a way that meant more than the words. My father stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the street below and said, "I'm proud of you. This is yours." We didn't talk about my aunt for a while. We drank coffee and talked about ordinary things. Then, near the end of the evening, I asked, almost involuntarily, "Did she really save your marriage?" "Honestly." My father laughed. Not unkindly. "She thinks so. We think we saved ourselves. She was there for one loud weekend. We've been here for every quiet day since." Update 4. The things I kept thinking about. She said she saved my parents' marriage. They said they were already working on it. She facilitated one conversation. They did the work of staying together for 15 years. Her intervention was a moment. Their marriage is a lifetime. One conversation doesn't create lifetime ownership. My mother said she never packed bags. My aunt claims she saw packed bags. Either my mother is lying about her own near divorce, or my aunt is remembering dramatically. My aunt has a pattern of being the hero in every story. I started to think the packed bags were mythology, not a lie exactly, but a detail her memory built to make the stakes match the importance she needed the moment to have. She claimed credit for preventing my trauma. But trauma isn't automatic. Many children of divorce are fine. Many children of intact marriages struggle. She priced her intervention against worst-case scenarios that might never have happened. That's not accounting, it's disaster fantasy. The logic: without her, parents' divorce, I'm damaged, no apartment. But every step is uncertain. Parents might have reconciled anyway. I might have thrived anyway. The apartment came from my choices, not her intervention. She wanted payment for a chain of maybes. I asked about my grandmother in her logic. If someone's presence at a pivotal moment creates ownership of outcomes, grandmother raised my mother, which shaped her capacity for marriage. Why doesn't grandmother get the apartment? My aunt couldn't answer. The logic only applied to her, because the logic was never really logic. It was a feeling dressed in logic's clothing. She needs to be essential. Every family story features her as savior. This was just the biggest demand from the biggest claim. When I refused to validate her importance with property, I became useless to her. The relationship died not over money, over her need to matter. My apartment cost 6 years of saving, living with roommates, driving a used car. None of that traces to one weekend when I was 12. My choices built this, not her conversation. She wasn't there for any of my sacrifices. She just wanted credit for all of my results. Resolution: what remains? A year out now. I still have the apartment. I repainted the bedroom last spring, a muted gray-green that I chose carefully and love. I have a coffee routine in the morning that involves standing at my kitchen window for 10 minutes before anything else, watching the streets settle into the day. These are small things. They're mine in a way that feels solid and real. My parents are still married. Still happy, not performed happiness, not the happiness of people who stayed together out of inertia, but something quieter and more durable than that. They chose each other after the hard weekend. They chose each other in counseling, in the ordinary arguments of ordinary years, in the hospital waiting room when my father had his knee surgery, in the car on the road trip last summer when they laughed until they couldn't breathe at something I missed because I'd been looking out the window. 15 years of choosing each other. That's the real story. That's what saved their marriage. My aunt is still telling hers. I don't wish her harm. I think about her sometimes with something that might be compassion, if compassion can coexist with firm refusal. She needed to have mattered. She did matter, just not in the way she needed. She was there during a hard moment in my family's history. She cared. She showed up. Those things are real and not nothing. But they didn't earn her my apartment, and they didn't entitle her to reshape reality to match her need. The mythology belongs to her. The apartment belongs to me. And somewhere in the city where they've always lived, my parents are having dinner together tonight, or watching something bad on television and laughing about it, or arguing gently about something that doesn't matter, or sitting quietly in the same room because after 30 years the same room is enough. Whatever it is, they're doing it together. Because they chose to. Every day for 15 years, they chose it. My aunt was there for one loud weekend. She wasn't there for any of the quiet days. The quiet days are the whole story. She just didn't write them. My aunt claims she saved my parents' marriage 15 years ago and now wants my apartment as reward. She says without her intervention, they'd have divorced, I'd be traumatized, and I'd have nothing. But I talked to my parents. They were already working on their marriage. My aunt facilitated one conversation. She didn't save them. They saved each other, through years of work and therapy and commitment that had nothing to do with one dramatic weekend. My aunt has a pattern. She's the hero of every story. She saved her friend's business. She rescued her neighbor from depression. She prevented a cousin's bad marriage. Every family event features her as essential, decisive, foundational. This is just her biggest claim on her biggest stage, with her biggest price tag. I refuse to pay. Not because I'm ungrateful. I appreciate that she cared. Because her contribution wasn't what she claims it was. Because my apartment came from my work, not her conversation. Because being present at one difficult moment doesn't create ownership of all future outcomes. She wanted $70,000 to validate her importance. I couldn't give her that. The apartment stays mine. Her mythology stays hers. And the marriage that was saved? My parents saved it themselves. Every day for 15 years, they chose each other. That's the real story. My aunt was just there for one chapter, and she thinks she wrote the book.